Tee. Welcome to the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2019 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale. Single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series as we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out, and I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in X said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary. We'll get an aggregate score, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer, are in total control as this is the You Pick format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this and future videos in this series stating two things: the phrase next and the team you'd like to see next. Some examples would be Cowboys next, Dallas next, boys, we them boys next. You get where I'm going with this. As a matter of fact, the next team up in the series is none other than Jersey Boys, America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. And look, the Cowboys, say what you want about them, and they didn't have a first round pick because of the Amari Cooper trade this year. Say what you want about the Dallas Cowboys. Say what you want about Dak Prescott. Say what you want about Ezekiel Elliott's off-the-field transgressions. Whatever the case may be, you can say what you want about Jerry Jones and him being overbearing and having too much control, yada, yada, yada. The Cowboys do the draft really well, okay? All right, this Cowboys team is talented. Every single year they have a shot because of the work that they do in April and May every single year. They put together a quality draft every single season, and that gives them a chance going into the future because they do the draft correctly. And so this is another draft, quality work put in by the Cowboys. Not my favorite Cowboys draft over the last 3 or 4 years, but I think they did some quality things. I thought they missed an opportunity to draft a wide receiver, and here's why. Look, and you're going to see my needs list and what I thought was the most important needs for this Cowboys team going into this draft. And look, I know you went out and got Randall Cobb in the offseason. It's a one-year deal. And Randall Cobb's no spring chicken, and Randall Cobb doesn't stay healthy. And that was his issue in Green Bay towards the end of his time in Green Bay. And so you don't know what you're going to get out of Randall Cobb. Obviously, you have Amari Cooper. He's still waiting on a new deal. He'll get that new deal. He's not going anywhere. They didn't trade away a first-round pick to allow this guy to walk in free agency. So he'll be a Cowboy for years to come. But then you look at the guys behind Cooper, and I just mentioned Randall Cobb on a one-year deal. You re-signed Tavon Austin. I thought that was a little sketchy at best. Okay, but you bring back Tavon Austin. You also have Michael Gallup, who looked good as a rookie, and I think he's going to develop just fine in Big D. But then after that, what do you really have? And yeah, you may like the development of Ced Wilson, a guy you drafted last year, I think in the 7th round or so. Maybe you think that you're going to get something out of Allen Hurns coming off of that injury. That was a gruesome injury. I don't know if I really like the depth at wide receiver. Thought that was a position you should have attacked. I really didn't think edge rusher was that big of a deal. Maybe you're trying to tell me something about some of the guys you've drafted in past years. Maybe you're trying to tell me something about Taco Charlton. Maybe you're trying to tell me something about Dorrance Armstrong. Maybe these guys aren't as good as you thought they were going to be, and maybe you need some depth along the defensive line because those guys aren't what you thought. But then again, you look at the picks spent at those positions and you say, well, maybe you're not in love with the guys that you drafted either. You're just throwing more darts at the board at edge rusher. We'll see. But obviously you've got Tank Lawrence. He got the massive deal. He's going to lead that group. We'll see what happens. Let's jump into this 2019 NFL draft of the Dallas Cowboys and see what they were able to bring in to this roster. We start here in the 2nd round. Remember, no first rounder because of the trade with Oakland for Amari Cooper. So no first round pick if you're the Dallas Cowboys. So we go to the 2nd round, 58th overall selection. Defensive lineman out of Central Florida, Tristan Hill is the pick. So let me get right to the business. I love this guy, Tristan Hill's game. He was one of my favorite players in this entire draft. He was one of those late risers. I talked about him at the Combine, how he lit the Combine on fire. And I was just so impressed with his movement skills as a big guy. And I really didn't know where he had come from. And usually that's a problem when you go to a school that I should know who you are. And Central Florida was on that massive win streak. And before their quarterback, Milton, went down with the injury. And so I should have known who Tristan Hill was. But because of some of the issues with him and his work ethic, and I talked about this on my podcast, and if you haven't checked out my podcast, what are you waiting on? Louie Tee Network podcast, available on all the major platforms: Google Music Play, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and of course the website louieteenetwork.net. But I talked about Tristan Hill, and I talked about the weird contract that the Cowboys had him agree to, which was essentially a work ethic contract. And so if not for the questions about this guy's work ethic, this might be a home run pick. But let's get to Tristan Hill and why I think he's one of the better defensive linemen that no one is talking about in this draft. And if you want to talk about explosive defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, there's, of course, Quinnen Williams and Ed Oliver. They're in a category onto themselves. But right after them, the next guy in line, that guy's Tristan Hill. All right, so let's talk about Tristan Hill and what he brings to the table. An explosive one-gap penetrating defensive tackle with tremendous upside. Tristan Hill looks the part of an ascending player with some handy tools. Hill plays the game violently with quick twitch movements and disruptive intentions that can be a gift and a curse. So let's stop there. This is a guy that when I watched him, he jumps off the screen with his twitchiness. The guys in the backfield consistently blowing up plays. Now, sometimes he'll get into the backfield and he'll overrun a play, or he'll get into the backfield and he will get out of his gap and he'll open up a massive hole for the running back. But that's what you get with explosive players. If they don't get to the ball carrier, if they don't mess up the track of the player initially, sometimes they can be out of place. But you'll take the aggressiveness with some of these guys because you know they're going to make more plays than they are mistakes. And he's one of those guys that if he brings it every single week, and that's what the Cowboys are hoping that he does. And they're hoping that he doesn't fall into some of his ways at Central Florida, where he was a little lazy and he's a little lackadaisical and he wasn't doing the things that we know he's fully capable of that allowed him to be on the bench, at times, because this guy didn't start his final year all season long for the most part. He was a guy that was coming off the bench, and his talents suggest that he should be on the field as much as possible, including the start of the football game. So that's something that teams had to look into. The Cowboys absolutely did their homework, and they talked to him, and they said, look, man, we know you're uber talented. That's why we want to take you with our first pick in this draft in the second round. But we got to know that you're going to come in here and you're going to work. If this guy works, you're not going to find many other defensive linemen in this draft more talented than that of Tristan Hill. If his skills are honed properly, Hill could be a force at the next level, and I truly, truly believe that. This guy is so talented. He's exceptional in terms of his get off. And again, when the motor is running hot and this guy is giving maximum effort, he's going to be a player that, just put it this way, as a Redskin fan myself, looking at this guy coming into the division, going to Dallas in particular, I cringe to think what this guy could potentially be along a defensive line that's already somewhat talented in my eyes, especially with Tank Lawrence and Crawford, I said that right, and some of the other guys that you have on that defensive line. Adding this guy to the mix, this is scary, man. This guy is so talented. And he really landed in a good spot. He's landing under a defensive coordinator that's going to get the most out of him. This is a really, really good pick. 6'3", 308-pound defensive tackle with the explosiveness to really help out a guy like Tank Lawrence along that defensive line. This is a great pickup by the Dallas Cowboys. In the second round, 58th overall selection. Tristan Hill, defensive tackle out of Central Florida, for me is And as I mentioned, if there weren't any questions about his work ethic, first of all, he's not here in the second round for you to take. He's a first round pick. That's for starters. Second of all, if he didn't have these issues, you're talking about a home run pick here. And that's the only thing stopping me from giving this guy a home run, especially here in the second round. The value that you got at a position of need, and I'll show you the needs, and I'll talk about the needs here in a second. But my comp for him is Jarrell Casey, the big-time defensive tackle in Tennessee, a guy that every single year you never know if you're going to get 10.5 sacks or you're going to get 4.5 sacks, but you're going to get a guy that's going to be disruptive in Jarrell Casey, and I think that's what you're getting here in Tristan Hill. Upside is ridiculous. Sky's the limit. And I think he's landing in a good spot with Rod Marinelli, a guy that can really get the most out of a guy like Tristan Hill. You go to the next pick for the Cowboys in the third round, 90th overall selection, offensive lineman out of Penn State, Connor McGovern is the selection. So you look at the needs. Let's talk about the needs quickly for the Dallas Cowboys. And as you can see right next to me, I have a list of the needs for the Dallas Cowboys that I think is important. And I put them in the order of importance in my mind. As I look at this Cowboys roster and what I think they need. And running back for me, the most important need by far. When you look at the roster, the running back position was so bare. It was Ezekiel Elliott and ... meaning nothing else. It was crickets. So they had to do something at running back. They did in this draft. We'll talk about that when we get there. Defensive line to me was another big need, especially interior defensive line help. Not necessarily edge rusher. I would have put that up there if I thought it was a need. I didn't think it was a big need. I put the 6 biggest needs in my mind for this Cowboys football team, and I thought defensive lineman was the biggest, second biggest need, and they've already taken care of that with Tristan Hill. Safety was a big need for me. You went out and got George Iloka. That's a 1-year deal. We'll see what he's able to do for you. But you look at that position, there's a lot of guys that you're okay with, but you're not satisfied at that position. And so I thought you could use an upgrade potentially. And there were some really talented safeties in this draft. If you went and got one early, I thought there was a chance that you could have really upgraded that position. You elected to draft that position later. Wasn't as satisfied with the pick you made. We'll talk about that when we get there. You look at receiver. You never decided to tackle safety wide receiver in this draft. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. I've already kind of touched on that anyway. Offensive line. And that's where we land with the 5th biggest need in this draft. And we can go ahead and take that need off the board as you were able to secure the services of Connor McGovern, a guy that I wanted my Redskins to select. And so you reached up and grabbed him in the 3rd round. And I think it's a really quality pick. I was not a huge Connor Williams fan last year. Obviously, you aren't either by this selection. And you're not giving up necessarily on Connor Williams with this selection. But what you're saying is we need to make sure that we have more depth along the offensive line. We know about the Travis Frederick situation. He's been cleared to come back, and it's good to see him back in the fold. But that was a trying year for the offensive line with some injuries. Obviously, you lose a guy like that who is a Pro Bowler and damn near all-pro player. It's hard to replace that kind of production. And then you start to have guys moving around. Joe Looney actually did a quality job for you last year. But like I said, the guard position, I think you're going to plug and play Connor McGovern at right guard. That's how I feel. I think he's going to come in and start for you immediately at right guard. And I think they're going to relegate Connor Williams to the bench. And I think you're going to get some quality production out of Connor McGovern, if you ask me. But we'll see. He could easily be playing left guard, left guard is where he'll be, I believe. Right guard was where he was at Penn State, but you already have a hell of a right guard already in Zach Martin. So I think this guy's going to be your left guard. But again, we will see, or I might have it backwards. Zach Martin may be your left guard, and I think you need a right guard. Either way, this is what I think of Connor McGovern. 6'5", 308 pounds, 34-inch arms, which is usually a great sign for an offensive lineman. And on an interior guy, it's rare with these guys to have really long arms. A lot of times you have the shorter arm guys inside. Yeah, he's got pretty solid length arms for an interior offensive lineman. A versatile offensive lineman with experience at both guard, 21 career starts there at Penn State, and center, 14 starts. So 35 career starts for Connor McGovern. Can be powerful at the point of attack at times, but usually is more of a barrier than a mover in the run game. So what I mean by that is he's not a man mover. He's not creating a new line of scrimmage a lot of times. What he's doing is he's getting in the way, and he's doing an adequate job of doing that, creating a barrier between he and the ball carrier. So he gets in the way. He does his job for the most part. However, he generally does his job and is reliable, having never missed a game in his career. 39 career games, 35 of them starts. And this is a junior we're talking about. So you're getting a guy that pretty much started when he jumped on campus at Penn State. Is solid in pass pro, but is not an elite athlete, which causes him to overset to combat speed and quickness. Watched him struggle a bit versus Draymond Jones, a guy that was drafted in this year's draft by the Denver Broncos in about the, let's call it the second, third round area. And Chase Young, a guy that a lot of people think is going to be a top 5 pick in the 2020 draft. So those are elite athletes he struggled with versus Ohio State, but you're going to see elite athletes at the next level. So that could be a little bit of a concern there, but we'll see what happens. All in all, he's an NFL starter that can offer a team flexibility on the interior of their offensive line. Again, I'm a Redskins fan. I wanted us to select him in the 3rd round. You guys took him in the 3rd round. I think it was an excellent pick by the Dallas Cowboys. To me, the rich get richer here. Your offensive line, already one of the best in the league easily, and with the addition of Travis Frederick coming back, if he's healthy, it's only going to get stronger. Now you add in another guy that I think is a plug-and-play offensive guard. It's getting stronger even more so. I think this is a really good pickup here in the 3rd round, 90th pick overall. Offensive lineman out of Penn State, Connor Mcgovern, for me, is so if you ask me who the comp is for a guy like Connor Mcgovern, to me, it's Brandon Linder, offensive guard out of Miami that was drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars some 3-4 years ago. A quality offensive lineman that was able to come in, give them some flexibility, could play all 3 interior offensive line positions. I feel the same way about Connor Mcgovern, and so that's my comp for him at this moment. As we move on to the 4th round, 128th overall selection, running back out of Memphis, Tony Pollard is the selection. So I talked about the Cowboys needing to address the running back position. So they do that here for the first time in this draft. They would not be done. They would double dip, and we'll talk about that later on when we get there. But let's take running back off of the board in terms of needs. But you really did need to double down on running back because, again, behind Zeke, there is absolutely nothing. I mean nothing. And so this was imperative. And you get a guy that you liked here in the 4th round in Tony Pollard, and a guy that really intrigued me starting with the Senior Bowl. And I talked about that on my Senior Bowl coverage and on the podcast, how Tony Pollard was a guy that really impressed me. And I also talked about him at the Combine. I thought he caught it well at the Combine, and he's a guy that at one point was a wide receiver at Memphis. So you got an athlete here, a guy that could play multiple positions, do a number of different things. The versatility here is probably what was most intriguing to the Dallas Cowboys. Let's talk about Tony Pollard and what he brings to the table. 6 feet, 210 pounds, ran a 4.5, 240 at the Combine, but then turned around and ran a 4.37 at his pro day. So let's just cut that in half and let's split the difference and let's call him a 4.45 guy, which is probably more along the lines of what he is, somewhere in that general vicinity. He said he was dealing with some issues at the Combine, and he wasn't feeling his best. That's why he ran so poorly, but it is what it is. The guy can run. He's fast. So let's call him a sub 4.5 40 guy. In any event, a dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands, evident by the FBS record-tying 7 kickoff returns for touchdowns in his collegiate career. So let's stop there for a second. Here's a guy that set the college football FBS record for most kickoff returns in his career with 7. He had one season in 2017 where he had 4 of them. So this guy has been dynamic throughout his career with kickoff returns. And I think that's something that the Cowboys also identified with him and said, hey, we could also use that ability at the next level as well. So he's going to do a number of things for the Cowboys. And that right there tells you the kind of guy you're getting and the type of flexibility that this guy possesses. Pollard is oozing with positional flexibility as he wore multiple hats at Memphis. He was a running back, wide receiver, kick returner, punt returner, and still his hands are questionable at best. I watched this guy drop a number of passes in tight quarters. You see a guy that is a little bit worried about the hit that's impending and not necessarily catching the football, which is why I think the Cowboys see him more as a wide receiver, or excuse me, a running back than a wide receiver. Again, he can catch it, though, very well out of the backfield, but not well enough to be a wide receiver at the next level. And I think the best position for him is, in fact, running back. So I think the Cowboys are doing the right thing because, again, at one point at Memphis, he was like more of a slot guy than he was a running back, but they would put him in the backfield an awful lot. So you could have went either way. If a team saw this guy as more of a receiver, they could have been a situation where he was drafted as a receiver and not a running back. The Cowboys elected to put him at running back, and I think that's the right move. However, his elusiveness, agility, speed, and quickness make him a weapon that must be accounted for, and running back is more natural for him. Pollard runs in between the tackles better than people give him credit for and has the ability to be an ideal change of pace / third down back in the league. And with you having Zeke Elliott, who seems to never get hurt, and doesn't seem to get very tired either, I think this is a guy that you don't have to play a ton, but he'll get carries. And you remember when you had Alfred Morris and you would switch off possessions and you would give Zeke a little bit of a breather. I think you could do a little bit of that here with Tony Pollard because Zeke is such a great receiver out of the backfield that you don't have to pull him off the field on third downs. It's not like you have a first and second down back in Zeke Elliott. You got a 3-down monster in Zeke Elliott. So this guy will see the field in some capacity. Maybe you can even stick him on the field at receiver at times. You can have a 2-man backfield with him and Zeke on the field at the same time. That's the kind of flexibility that Tony Pollard gives you. He allows you to get creative on the football field. Or you can just say, hey, Zeke, I'm going to give you a breather here. You can take this possession off. Tony's going to run it. Tony's going to catch it a little bit. And so you have some positional flexibility. You have a little bit of a chess piece here. And oh, by the way, he can return kickoffs for you. We know Tavon Austin is a guy you like returning punts. That's part of the reason you brought him back. But Pollard is an exceptional kick returner. So I can see him taking over the duties there. There's a lot of things that he brings to the table. I think he's a really good athlete. I like Tony Pollard a lot. I like his versatility. I don't think he's great at any one thing he does except for kick returner. But I think you're getting a guy that at a position that you desperately needed to address here in the 4th round. 128th overall selection, running back out of Memphis. Tony Pollard for me is when I look at Tony Pollard, my comp for him, if you remember, Dexter McCluster, the small scat back, and in terms of size, Pollard is much bigger. You know, McCluster was like a 5'8", 5'9" type of guy. But remember, he was a dynamic kickoff return man. He was a guy that was uber versatile coming out of Ole Miss, could catch it, could run it, and he was really big for the Chiefs, parlayed that into a deal with the Titans. And so I see a lot of those same qualities in Tony Pollard as he moves on to the league. We go to the 5th round now. Cowboys had 2 5th-round selections, the first of which, and they spent them on 2 U players, both by the name of Jackson, no relation, but the first of which, 158th overall, cornerback out of the U, Michael Jackson, is the selection. So cornerback Michael Jackson Sr. is your pick here in the 5th round. This is a really intriguing pick because this pick to me can go in a number of ways. Right now, the Cowboys identify him as a cornerback, so I'm going to call him a cornerback. I think he could easily make the transition to safety and may even be forced to, especially with the way the Cowboys elect to play defense and the things that make him a good defender. I don't necessarily know if they fall in line with the Cowboys. Now, if the Cowboys are getting pressure on the quarterback, this is a guy that is going to be vital, to your success because he does some things at the line of scrimmage that really disrupt the timing of a play. And if the Cowboys are getting consistent pressure on the quarterback, this is a guy that could really help in the 5th round. Now, if the Cowboys aren't getting great pressure, this is a guy that could hurt you here in the 5th round if he has to see the field. Cornerback is an interesting position for the Cowboys. Anyway, let's go to the cornerback position, as I had that as your final need that you needed to address in this draft. And so let's take cornerback off the board in terms of needs. You got a bunch of young guys, obviously Chidobe Awuzie. You got Jordan Lewis, some guys that I actually thought were really talented that are still at the cornerback position. Obviously, the leader of the group is Byron Jones, and so you're just throwing another dart at that board and seeing if it sticks. And I don't have a problem with the addition of Michael Jackson here in the 5th round. Let's talk about what he brings to the table. First of all, I love his size at 6'1", 210, runs a 4.4, 5.40, 40-inch vert, a 10.8 broad. The guy's a stupid athlete, all right? So you got size, you got length, you got athleticism, you've got speed. What is there not to like? Why is he sitting here in the 5th round if he's all of these things that the NFL values at the cornerback position? Well, here we go. A cornerback that looks the part. Long arms, all right, athletic, good size, loves to press. And that's his calling card. When he's at his best, he's in the face, deleting the airspace between he and the wide receiver. And he does his work early. He's one of those cornerbacks that when he's at his best, he does his work early. What I mean by that is at the beginning of the play, at the beginning of the snap, he gets his hands on receivers and disrupts the timing of the play. If he's doing his job at his maximum capacity, he's probably running that receiver somewhere near the sideline and really effing up the timing of the play. That being said, but after you get past the athleticism and the measurables and the physicality, he's a super physical corner that is not afraid to mix it up and come in, help in run support. You see a player with limitations, all right? Lacks the ability to drive on routes consistently. I feel like you can have a field day underneath. When this guy plays off and soft, I think it's for the catches are for the taking. Whatever you want, you can have in front of this guy. All right, you can have the 12 back to 10 comeback. You can have the curl route. You can have a slant. All of these things are available to you if he's playing off. If he's playing press, it's a lot more difficult because he is getting into the chest of that wide receiver. So he's slow to transition out of breaks. So even when he does press, if a guy's able to beat him off the jam, he's slow to transition out of his breaks. So if that receiver decides to come back to the football, it takes him a step or two to come out of that transition and come back to the football, which allows that receiver to separate and get the football. While he's shown ball skills, he had 4 career interceptions at Miami, all of them in 2017. Unless he's playing cover 2, to me, or cover 1, where he's able to be aggressive, come up and jam, but has safety help over the top, because I think he's a build-up speed guy. He's not one of these uber acceleration guys where he takes 2 steps and he's already at top speed. He's the guy that has to take 5 or 6 steps in a straight line to get up to that 4.45. And by that time, with some of these fast receivers, he's already smoked. All right, I've seen guys run by him on tape, so I know that he's going to need help over the top if he's going to be aggressive at the line of scrimmage. So that safety is going to have to be shaded over to his side. If you're playing cover 1, he may be destined for safety. To me, I look at Michael Jackson, I see all the makings of a guy that will make a smooth transition to safety if cornerback doesn't work. Now, he's going to get an opportunity to play corner, excuse me, first. But if that doesn't work out, I could easily see a transition to safety. And a guy that I comped him to is Antrell Rowe, another U player, coincidentally enough. A guy that was a corner at Miami, played corner well enough to the point where he was a first-round pick, but ended up transitioning to safety once he got to the league because he just wasn't corner material. And he ended up having a solid career as a safety. I think the same could be in the works for a guy like Michael Jackson Sr. We'll see. I could be wrong, and he could end up being just what the doctor ordered for the Dallas Cowboys. I can tell you this much. He gives the Cowboys something that they lack at the cornerback position: size. Every guy that you have, Byron Jones is a 6-foot corner. He might be one of the bigger guys that you have. But you look at Jordan Lewis, he's a sub 6 foot corner. You look at Chidobe Awuzie, he's barely 6 feet, if he is in fact 6 feet. This guy's 6'1", 210. He's a bigger corner, something that the Cowboys lack. So I like this move, and we'll see what he turns into. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he's actually what you need at the cornerback position. The Cowboys play a ton of man coverage. They ask a lot of their corners. We'll see what happens and if he's able to get the job done or not. To me, he's more of a cover 2 guy, and we'll see if he's able to come in and help this Cowboys defense here in the 5th round, 158th overall selection, cornerback out of Miami. Michael Jackson, for me, is so as I mentioned, you doubled down in the 5th round on you players, and you doubled down on the surname Jackson as in the 5th round, 165th overall selection. Edge rusher Joe Jackson, not the father of the Jacksons, just Joe Jackson is the pick. So Joe Jackson is a guy that jumped onto my radar last year when I was doing film study on some of the U players that were drafted. And I thought he had a phenomenal game in the bowl game versus Wisconsin. And we remember just how good the Miami Hurricanes were 2 seasons ago when they were in the discussion as a potential playoff team until they lost the game late to Pitt. And so this is a team that had a bunch of defensive football players over the last 2 years that have made plays, and Joe Jackson was one of those guys. I thought his best football was last year, or 2 years ago in 2017. He did some really good things in 2017, not so much in 2018, and I really don't know the answer as to why he regressed a bit from the 9 sacks he had in 2017 to 6.5 sacks in 2018. Whatever the case may be, or I might have it backwards. I thought he was better in 2017. I'm just going to say that. But in any event, he brings some things to the table. And again, as I mentioned at the top of this breakdown, you're just throwing another dart at the edge rusher position at defensive end, and you're seeing if it sticks. Again, I don't know if this is an indictment on Dorrance Armstrong or if this is an indictment on Taco Charlton. We'll find out. Obviously, you spent a first-round pick on Taco Charlton, so you should be expecting some big dividends to be paid off here shortly. And I'm hearing that everyone thinks it's going to be a major and massive year for him this year. We'll see. But here's a guy in Joe Jackson that's 6'4", 275 pounds, 34-inch arms, ran a 4.77 at the combine or at his pro day. And much like his former U teammate that was selected with the previous pick, Jackson looks the part. Love his energy and relentlessness. And every so often that wins. You know, in the college ranks, at the NFL ranks, guys that hustle and give maximum effort and have a hot motor all the time, that's going to win by itself sometimes. You know, every so often, a guy's going to have a bad pass set. A guy's going to come off the ball late, not maybe hear the snap, come off the football late, and a guy that hustles and has energy, he's gonna fall into 3 or 4 sacks this season just because of the constant energy. And Joe Jackson is one of those guys with constant energy. So from that standpoint, I love what he brings to the table. Against the run, he is solid. You know, nothing flashy, and probably sums up Jackson in a nutshell. Not a tremendous burst off the snap, not enough speed to induce fear, not enough bend to turn the corner, not enough power to bully his way to the quarterback. Still, with his frame, motor, and tools, there could be some modest NFL production for Joe Jackson. And again, I love the fact that he's going to a team that already has a dominant edge rusher, so that's going to take a lot of pressure off of a guy like Joe Jackson, because at Miami, he was their go-to pass rusher. And so now he's not going to be that guy anymore. So that takes a little bit of pressure off of him. And so we'll see if he's able to, one, make the football team. There's no guarantee to a 5th-round pick, but again, I don't think that the depth at defensive end is enough to which he can't make this football team. So I fully expect Joe Jackson to crack this 53-man roster. But that being said, I think he's a guy that has some tools. I saw a spin move. I saw a guy that was willing to crash inside at times. So there's some stuff here to work with. And he, like I said, he's got longer arms. There could be some development here And the fact that Rod Marinelli is going to be able to get his hands on him, who I think is one of the better defensive line coaches in all of football, I think this is a really good landing spot for a guy like Joe Johnson. He could develop really well here and turn into a really good pass rusher for you, a guy that is good for 6 to 8 sacks a year. And I think if you can get that out of him, you feel really good about this 5th round selection here in Joe Jackson. For me, my comp for him right now is Deshaun Hall, a guy that was drafted by the Carolina Panthers in the 3rd round, I believe, out of Texas A&M a few years ago. Didn't pan out with the Panthers, and I could easily see the same thing happening with Joe Jackson. He gets a year or 2 in Dallas. They're not satisfied. They draft another guy. They move on. That could happen with him too. And now Deshaun Hall is a Philadelphia Eagle, if I'm not mistaken. We'll see if he's able to make their roster. But Joe Jackson is a guy that has talent, just like Deshaun Hall does, but has some length, just like Deshaun Hall does. But you question some of the ability to get to the quarterback, and those limitations may stop him from sticking on this roster when it's all said and done. We'll see. But I think it's another solid pick here in the 5th round, 165th overall selection. Edge rusher out of the U, Joe Jackson for me is So you move on to the 6th round now, 213th overall pick, safety out of Texas A&M. Donovan Wilson is the selection. So, not my favorite pick in this draft for the Dallas Cowboys. As a matter of fact, this is my least favorite pick for the Dallas Cowboys in this draft. I didn't really like what I saw on tape with him, and there are a lot of question marks for me with him in terms of what I can expect from him as a football player. And that's part of the reason why he's sitting here in the 6th round. All right, when you start to get in these later rounds, there's a reason these players are sitting here. So I could absolutely be wrong about this guy, but I wasn't overly impressed with what I saw. 6 feet, 199 pounds, so essentially 6 feet, 200 pounds, 38.5-inch vert. So the guy has some athleticism. I actually saw him use that vert to go up and disrupt the play down the field against A.J. Brown, one of the NWO wide receivers at Ole Miss. And it was a hell of a play. He leaped up, broke up a pass, and I saw every inch of that 38.5-inch vert. So I know that actually does translate to the football field. An intriguing player with some question marks. He played nickel in 15 and 16 and had 6 combined interceptions, 5 of them coming in 2015. All right. Then an ankle injury sidelined him for almost all of 2017. So he missed an entire season essentially in 17, came back in 2018 as more of a safety and less of a nickel, and lacked the speed that he had in 15 and 16. And so, but he would hit anything moving. Like, this guy is a walking missile. Like, he's looking to smash whatever has the football. That being said, his aggressiveness leads to plenty of missed tackles, which isn't helped by very poor angles. His angles that he takes, his pursuit angles, are just horrific. I'm looking at him, I'm saying, bro, what the hell are you doing? What are you looking at? Why did you think that was a smart idea to take that angle? And it puts him in some very bad situations. And that you can add that to part of the reason that he misses tackles. He's just out of control a lot of times. This guy's like a Tasmanian devil of sorts when it comes to trying to hit guys. He's looking to blow up people in the kill shot. He got targeting penalty versus Alabama. I thought it was a really bad call. The receiver dipped his head and they made contact and they threw him out of the game. But he is a guy that will lead with his helmet. He's a guy that is very reckless in the way that he approaches the game. I like players that play the game with reckless abandon, but it's got to be controlled chaos, and it's not that way with Donovan Wilson a lot of times. Not to mention, he lacks the instincts to decipher what is happening quick enough to make plays consistently. Against Alabama, before he got thrown out of the game, there's a route combination coming his way where the outside receiver runs essentially a post and then up the field. And he kind of just standing there flat-footed. He should have been moving his feet. Whatever that receiver was going to do, you need to be moving your feet already. And he came at him 100 miles an hour, faked the post, and went out kind of to the seam, and it was easy money. And I'm like, bro, you just standing there. You're just watching this develop in front of you. You see the guy coming right at you, screaming, running fast as hell. You should be moving, and he wasn't. And I saw plays where he could have made plays, but he just doesn't identify what's happening in front of him fast enough. Despite the athleticism, if Wilson can't impact on special teams, I just don't see him making a roster. And I think you got a bunch of guys at safety right now. And he may end up being one of these practice squad guys that you develop, and maybe you like him next year and he's able to help you then. I don't know if I necessarily see him cracking a 53-man roster with some of the guys you already have at the safety position that you trust, Jeff Heath among others. I told you got George Iloka. I think you have some stuff, Xavier Woods. I just don't know if this guy's going to make your roster. So we'll see. There's some things you obviously like. I don't see it here in the 6th round. 213th overall selection. Safety out of Texas A&M. Donovan Wilson for me. And let's take care of the safety position before we move on with this selection of Donovan Wilson. But for me, he is and my comp for him is Bakari Rambo. If you remember the wildly talented Georgia safety that came into the league as a liability at the safety position, missed a ton of tackles, but had ball skills and production there. And he could do some things, but you knew you didn't want him as your last line of defense. I feel the same way about Donovan Wilson. He'll hit you, but he'll miss as many times as he will hit as well. You go to the 7th round now. Cowboys had 2 7th-round picks, the first of which 218th overall, running back out of the Ohio State University, Mike Weber Jr. is the selection. So 5'10", 211 pounds stands Mike Weber, 4.47 40, so the guy can run. And I think you get a quality back here, but and you needed more bodies at running back. So I fully expect him and Tony Pollard to be on this roster when it's all said and done, because, again, you had nothing at running back. So I think he's going to fill out the roster, and I fully expect him to, and it's not often you fully expect a 7th-round pick to make the roster. I fully expect Mike Weber to make this roster. Quality caliber backup running back. Solid size, good vision and patience. Outstanding contact balance. That's one of those running back traits that not enough people talk about. I talk about it all the time because I look at Alvin Kamara, and that's the guy that I always talk about when I talk about contact balance. The reason why he's so dynamic is his ability to take a hit and not be swayed by contact, not be knocked off balance, to be able to take a hit at the knee pad and still find a way to pick up an additional 7-8 yards to keep his balance. That's, to me, a big-time trait that the elite backs have. You're going to have to make guys miss, 1. 2, you've got to be able to take contact and remain standing, and Mike Weber Jr. does that. Now, as for making guys miss, he will block. He can catch the football out of the backfield. Conversely, he's somewhat stiff, lacks elusiveness, no real MYM here, okay? No make you miss. And doesn't have another gear despite a sub 4.5 40. So, again, he's sitting here in the 7th round for a reason. There are limitations to Mike Weber. And he's a talented football player, but to me, he's right around where he was supposed to be drafted here in the 7th round. I had him as my 17th or 18th best back in the draft, and I think he was drafted 15th or 16th in terms of running back, somewhere in there. So I wasn't that far off. Mike Weber Jr. for me is a guy that does some good things, but he's going to be 3rd on the depth chart, and that's where he belongs. All right, behind Pollard, behind Zeke Elliott. He'll have to play special teams to make this football team, obviously. And if he's able to do that, whatever table scraps is left at running back, he'll get those. So in the 7th round, 218th overall pick, running back out of the Ohio State University, Mike Weber for me is And in terms of a comp, to me, he reminds me of Kerwin Williams, a running back out of Utah State that was taken by the Arizona Cardinals some 5-6 years ago. Ask Kerwin Williams. And I just thought Kerwin Williams, smaller than Mike Weber, but similar in his abilities. Kerwin Williams could run. You know, he's a sub 4.5 guy, but it never felt like he was running away from anybody. He got the most out of his talents, but he wasn't dynamic. He wasn't explosive. He didn't make people miss. I see a lot of those same traits and characteristics in Mike Weber Jr. So now you go to the last pick in this draft, 7th round, 241st overall selection. Edge rusher out of Oregon, Jalen Jelks is the selection. So you look at Jalen Jelks. Here's a guy, 6'5", 256 pounds, 35-inch arms, 4'9", 240. To me, he's a long, active edge rusher that surprisingly, given his thin frame, is extremely stout at the point of attack. I was actually impressed with him at the point of attack. This is in large part to his nearly 35-inch arms. I mean, this dude's arms are massive in terms of length. Sometimes his motor, coupled with quickness and length, can win out for Jelks, but against the pass, Jelks has little to no juice. No moves, no speed, no threat to me off the edge as a rusher. I didn't see a guy that threatened the quarterback at all. Didn't threaten tackles, didn't force guys to respect any one facet of his game. I mean, hell, okay, so you're not the most athletically gifted and you're not the most explosive off the edge. You do have length, so use that. He didn't even do that at Oregon. When he got sacks, he fell into sacks a lot of times. So honestly, Jelks seems more like a 3-4 outside linebacker than he does a base 4-3 defensive lineman. Obviously, the Cowboys run a 4-3 defensive alignment, so I don't honestly think that this is a great fit for them. I'm not a huge fan of this pick, especially when I thought you could have drafted a receiver here. And again, you may like your receiver position. You may like the development of Ced Wilson at the back end of the roster. You might think that you're going to get the ex-Jacksonville Jaguars receiver back healthy and he'll be ready to rock and roll, Allen Hurns. You may love what you're going to get out of Randall Cobb if he's healthy. You may think that Tavon Austin is going to stay healthy and provide you something at receiver. I wouldn't count on it. Again, these are all guys that you're going to be counting on. Obviously, I feel like your top 2 receivers are going to be studs for you in Cooper and Gallup. But after those guys, I thought there's a little bit of an issue with depth. That's why I didn't like the letting go Cole Beasley. But he got a good payday from Buffalo, probably more than you were willing to pay. And he was outspoken. I think that's more so than anything else what got him ousted in Dallas is Cole Beasley wasn't afraid to open his mouth when he didn't like something going on with the organization. And so they moved on from him. Thought you could have addressed receiver here. Maybe you could have addressed it earlier. Either way, you take Jalen Jelks here. I don't think he's a great fit for your defense, and I don't really see the upside and the value here in the 7th round. And so 7th round, 241st overall selection, edge rusher Jalen Jelks out of Oregon for me is so Jalen Jelks, his comp for me is George Selvey, edge rusher out of South Florida. He has length, or he had length and the ability to get around the edge with his length. I thought he was going to be another JPP. He played with JPP at South Florida. I thought he was the next coming of JPP, and he wasn't. And this guy has that kind of same build as a JPP or a George Selvey, but he's not JPP. He's more George Selvey, a guy that currently isn't in the league any longer. So that's the Dallas Cowboys draft in a nutshell. I thought they did some quality things with their draft. I really love the pick of Tristan Hill and Connor Mcgovern to start off this draft. I think that Pollard is going to be a really solid piece for you at running back behind Zeke Elliott. I think he's a perfect complement to him. And I also think that he's going to help you in the kick returns game as well. So the versatility that he brings to the table, a big coup for the Dallas Cowboys. After that, a lot of question marks. What are you going to get out of these two Jacksons out of Miami? What really does the safety bring to the table out of Texas A&M? A lot of questions, not a ton of answers with some of those guys, but I think your first three picks are going to be hits for you in this draft that are going to help you moving forward. And so let's take a look at the score for the Dallas Cowboys in the 2019 NFL Draft. So again, not the Cowboys' finest work in the draft, in my estimation. I still think they got some talented football players, especially early on. But I've seen better from the Cowboys in the draft. To me, this could easily turn into another talented haul that they add to their roster and continue to keep them moseying along in the NFC East. They won the division last year, and with a lot of those guys coming back and adding to that mix, they will be in that discussion again in 2019 when it's all said and done. I think this is a quality draft class, but again, I've seen them do better in previous years. But that being said, that's the Dallas Cowboys 2019 NFL Draft wrap-up here on the Louie Tee Network. I, of course, am your set man, Louie Tee. Thank you for joining me. If it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage. It could be. Remember, check out the Louie Tee Network podcast. Remember, subscribe to the Louie Tee Network if you haven't already done so, and make sure that you continue to support the movement. Turn on your notifications button so you don't miss a single thing as we cover all 32 teams in the National Football League here on the Louie Tee Network. Until next time, I'm your man Louie Tee, signing off. Have a good one.